can you keep a secret?
Changing hearts and minds.
Changing hearts and minds.
Changing hearts and minds.
Changing hearts and minds.
Changing hearts and minds. Changing hearts and minds. Changing hearts and minds.
Changing hearts and minds.
Welcome to Change Your POV podcast. You're listening to Changing Hearts and Minds, a show about reviving the warrior spirit and remembering the past to improve our future. I'm your host, Jeff Adamick. Let's get this party started.
Ladies and gentlemen, am I totally screwed or what? You're funny.
I want to discuss all this behavior.
Let me out of here!
I spent years as a Green Beret, and the one thing that is absolutely certain is most people don't understand what we are. Everyone thinks of Rambo or some door-kicking operator taking down a target. Well, yeah, that was part of the job. It is far from the purpose for Special Forces. Let's make it clear, the Green Berets are trained and tasked with being part of the military that assimilates to other cultures and uses unconventional warfare tactics as a standard, not as an additional tool. Blend in, assimilate to the local natives. We are the subject matter experts in building rapport and guerrilla warfare. During times of war or peace, we can be found at every part of every national interest activity that's going on in the world. We're either winning the hearts and minds of other cultures or helping them overthrow oppressive regimes, but with all that responsibility and the additional tasks to include door kicking and military special operation missions, they're not the first to change the way that we didn't invent that, guys. Matter of fact, we're going to do a show today about the person who I believe established the way it's done in modern warfare now. I'm going to go ahead and say he's the father of modern day unconventional warfare, and from a place you would not expect. From age-old aristocracy of the British Empire, not to mention a British Army officer, and he still was able to change everything that he was doing, much to the chagrin of his command, and so much so that he pretty much single-handedly won an entire wing of the First World War. He's buried next to the greatest friggin' leaders in British history, and he's the complete opposite of what you expect from a British military person. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the guy that was played by Peter O'Toole, Lawrence of Arabia, T.E. Lawrence.
It damn well hurts.
Certainly it hurts.
Well, what's the trick then?
The trick, William Potter, is not minding that it hurts.
You are an Englishman. Are you not loyal to England?
To England and to other things.
He was a poet, a scholar, and a mighty warrior.
Thank you.
He was also the most shameless exhibitionist since Barnum and Bailey.
What is it, Major Lawrence, that attracts you personally to the desert?
It's clean. There may be honor among thieves, but there's none in politicians.
Look, sir, we can't just do nothing.
Why not? It's usually best.
Now, I can already see you guys are getting ready to be like, oh, fuck, British officer. Hold on, man. If you haven't seen the movie, don't turn me off yet. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Andrew back to the show again. Andrew McDowell, the unofficial co-host of Changing Hearts and Minds. If we ever get to the point where we're paid to do this, Andrew, I'm going to have you on paid. Like, you know how like all the radio show hosts have their go-to guy that always fills in for them?
Yep.
Yeah, you're going to be my guy that does that.
I like it.
Yeah,
I'll take it.
Welcome back to the show, buddy.
Thank you, man. I appreciate being back.
So, Andrew, I led into that because I want you to tell them, because you told me a couple months ago that you had never seen Lawrence of Arabia.
Yes, that's true.
And I told you that you had to stop what you were doing and do not talk to me again until you watched it, because I now wanted to do a show on it. And what did you think about whether or not you were missing out by not knowing about this guy for years.
I was blown away. I honestly, I haven't read his seminal work yet, but I'm shocked and appalled as a student of history and someone who kind of appreciates the asymmetrical in life that I didn't know more about this guy. I mean, I think that Lawrence was, I think, one of the great minds of the 20th century, and
and he was a warrior, man. Don't
God damn it. Yeah.
That's the one thing about him that's what gets me. That's what I love about him, is there is nothing about his mannerisms. And Peter O'Toole played him, apparently, according to historical accuracy, he played him perfect. Like they say he was exactly like that. When you watch the movie, and we'll talk about when we talk about his life in depth, we talk about this reporter that came from the Chicago Tribune that pretty much made him known to the Western world. Pretty much the guy that's the reason there's a movie about him. That guy said later on that Peter O'Toole made him think he was right around him again. So when you watch the movie, you watch Peter O'Toole, a lot of you guys are going to be like, fuck this guy. He talks too much about feelings, and he's kind of got effeminate mannerisms. Yeah, guess what, guys? He might have been gay. And I'm going to go into it now, Andrew. Yeah, I'm going to tell you guys something. There is a lot of stuff you'll read online about whether or not this guy was gay. Who cares? I mean, who fucking cares?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if a person's gay or not. It's the military, and as long as you're willing to pick up a weapon and defend your country, I don't care what you do in your personal life. As long as your personal life ain't being a serial killer or hurting kids. I'll tell you what, if you disagree with me and you want to send me hate mail, go read about Alexander the Great, probably the greatest war general in history, and then come back and tell me how being gay affects being a soldier.
Yes.
Now, if you want to go into arguments about transgender in the military, I'll argue that there's cost and medical responsibilities that come with those people joining the military. I'll argue that, but I will not argue homosexuality because I would rather have a gay guy next to me in a foxhole than a coward. And I guarantee you, every single one of us has served with gay people before. You may not have known it, but you did. Just hard truth. So that's it. I'm not going to talk. We don't want to talk about his sexuality because to me it's irrelevant. Because I think this guy was such a innovator, a warrior, a leader. First and foremost, a leader despite not wanting to be a leader. He did not want to. So Andrew, he's going to lead us off. We're going to actually, guys, if you've seen the movie and you're listening, we're going to go in chronological order like the movie. And this episode it's a two-parter, guys. This episode will end with the taking of Aqaba, just like the movie. Easter egg. Love it. I planned that out. But anyway, we have more stuff in this. If you saw the movie, you guys didn't get most. He's got so much more to his life than just that movie. So let's get into it. Let's dig right down into it, man. Let's talk about
T.E. Lawrence.
T.E. Lawrence, the man who has a last name different from his parents.
Thomas Edward Lawrence, or T.E. Lawrence, or Lawrence of Arabia, was born in Wales, in a borderline unpronounceable town. I think it's now called Gwynedd. If there are any Welsh people listening, I apologize in advance.
They speak English, the Welsh. So if you can't pronounce it, if you can't pronounce it, that means you can't speak English.
Well, I mean, they also speak Welsh.
Is there really a language called Welsh?
Yes, there is.
Is it just English with a really deep accent?
No.
Oh, okay.
No,
so it's kind of like the Irish have Cockney.
The Irish have Irish. Gaelic.
Or Gaelic, that's it, not Cockney. Yep. Gaelic, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
But Irish guy here.
Yeah.
I didn't know that Welsh had its own language.
Yes, they have their own language.
Probably because I never cared.
Well, there's something we've said for that too.
Yeah.
So Jeff was alluding just now to Lawrence having a different name than his parents. And there's a good reason for that. His father was an Anglo-Irish guy named Thomas Chapman, who abandoned his wife after he fell in love with.
He was a noble, though. He was a noble.
He was. Yep. He was a member of the aristocracy. He fell in love with a woman named Sarah Junner, who was a Scotswoman who'd been the governess of his daughter. So he ran off with the babysitter.
Who she was also illegitimate child.
Yes, she was.
She did not have her parents' last name.
Correct. Her father.
You know what his last name was?
Junner.
Lawrence.
Lawrence.
Her father's last name was Lawrence. She didn't have it. That's why I think it's so interesting where the kids get the name from.
That's crazy. That's a fact that I was not aware.
Yeah,
of.
I had to dig down deep for that little piece of knowledge. And guys, so you understand what we're talking about. She didn't have the same last name as her parents because she was an illegitimate child. But she gave her illegitimate children her father's name. And I don't know if there was intent behind that. It didn't seem like they were bad parents. I mean, he lived with her, right? He was divorced, but he just wouldn't get married to her.
Yes, correct. And I mean, and this is all through T.E. Lawrence's father, Thomas, inherited a baronetcy in Ireland, at his ancestral home in Ireland, in Westmeath, and they kept living in England together. I mean, there's no sign that this was kind of well, I mean, there were 5 kids, so it wasn't like it was a one-off or a guy having a flutter. I think that these two legitimately loved each other and did everything they could to be together and
Right.
make sure that Lawrence and his brothers, were raised in a traditional.
All 5 of them.
Yeah, all 5 of them in a family. Yep.
Now that's the thing I saw that I thought was important is in the movie, guys, and we're going to reference the movie a lot because the movie's very accurate. Lawrence talks to one of the Arabs about where he comes from and how he was an outcast in his society because his father wasn't married to his mother and didn't have his last name, couldn't get any of his noble titles and all that stuff. But so the father gets all this noble stuff given to him and he doesn't move there. So that's why I know that his dad was a good father because his dad stayed with the wife and the kids where they were at, even though he had these castles to go move into. Yep. And he wasn't just not letting them have his name to prevent them from getting the title by being illegitimate. He really was just not giving a shit about the nobility, but not paying attention that he sent his kid to a really good school where it became an issue, I think.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think that one of the other things about Lawrence, and I think that this is something that's important to his later life, was that he saw himself and was raised as something of an outsider because he was the illegitimate son of a member of the aristocracy and a commoner, right, mm-hmm. for lack of a better term, but
he
also
was a commoner living in a world of aristocrats.
Yes, and they lived, growing up, and so Lawrence was born in 1888. Between 1894 and 1896, they lived out in private woods in Southampton, Southampton Water in Hampshire in England. The residence was, completely isolated. Lawrence had lots of opportunities to go out and do things, but it was mostly by himself.
Which is weird. I wonder where his brothers were at this time, because there was 5 of them and they were pretty close together.
Yep, but I think it was personality. I think that Lawrence didn't mind, kind of like I think a lot of folks, didn't mind being by himself and didn't mind kind of having his own pursuits. Yeah, I think he liked being around his family and that was very important to him. But I don't think it was, he needed to be around somebody all day, every day to be happy.
Well, it's somebody who was very happy, was very content with who he was as a person.
Yep.
As you'll see as time goes on. And I think that goes back to childhood. I also believe that his drive to achieve comes from a balance between he wants to achieve without making other people his stepping stone. He never did anything and he never did anything with casualties that he, like, I'll use this guy to get somewhere. He did everything the right way, in my opinion. But also that drive to prove himself. I think that he didn't even know that he was an outcast until he got moved. They moved when he was like, what, a teenager, young teenager?
1896, so he's 12.
12, yeah. So young man, puberty starting. You're starting to feel yourself. You get to this new place, and everyone treats you like an outsider because of your last name, and you don't even understand why. You're made to realize why, but it makes you pissed off. But you don't show anybody that because you're intelligent, but that's where I think his drive comes from. That drive to achieve, that's got to come from some kind of trauma, and I think that the story right there is, we all seen how nobility and people who are entitled treat people who are not entitled. Mm-hmm. And how shocking it is when you see that when you're not expecting it, like Lawrence maybe was. That's all speculation, but that's where I think it comes from.
Yeah. I think that it's one of those kind of interesting things about English nobility, right? If you look at we're jumping ahead, 30 years here, but, during World War II, how many of the English aristocrats kind of laid everything down and went and joined, the commando brigades or the paras or something like that. I think that there's certainly some of the, people feel like they should be handed things on a silver platter,
right, up
till wartime. But I think that, from what I've read and what I've seen, and some folks that, I knew growing up, they laid it down because at a certain point, I think they realized that, what's the thing from Spider-Man, to whom much is given, much is expected, or whatever it is. I
To
think
have
that,
great power is to all have
Yep.
great responsibility.
Yep, exactly.
I don't think that's why, though. I would disagree.
No, I
I
don't
think
say
the
that's
fact
why.
that they had Pearl Harbor every single night of the week from the Blitzkrieg.
Well, that probably didn't help.
I mean, they were driven. I think that was the war where they showed what they really had.
Mm-hmm.
They were still England. They were still standing out in an island by themselves against the greatest military shock troop power in history, and they survived. And a lot of it had to do with Churchill's leadership, but I think a lot of it had to do with their love of, they bonded. And we had Pearl Harbor bonded America. They got Pearl Harbor every night, guys. So, but again, that's way down the road.
Yep, we'll have to do one on the.
We're going to do plenty of shows on World War II. We can do. There's too many.
Yep. But let's go back to the years before the Second World War.
No, before the First World War, man.
There's that too. Lawrence, after the family moved to Oxford, he attended the City of Oxford High School for Boys from 1896 to 1907. And I think that this is, as Jeff was saying, this is where he was exposed to the difference and the isolation because of his being born on the wrong side of the sheets, as it were. He, kind of an interesting note, long after Lawrence dies, one of the houses at this school where he was something of a pariah was actually named after him, which is kind of an interesting note. The school's since closed.
That's achieving your goals right there.
Mm-hmm.
He showed the people that shunned him, he became loved in their eyes. That to me, that's the real victory by this guy. Is he became so loved when he was such an outcast.
Yes, absolutely. And then he starts to, around the same time, be dabbled in I'm going to call them quasi-military or paramilitary organization.
Dabble.
Yep, because he doesn't actually join the military formally until later, but he ran away from home in about 1905 and joined up with the Royal Garrison Artillery in Cornwall.
Yeah, allegedly.
There's record of this. Allegedly,
according to him, although there's no reason for him to lie.
Exactly, and that's what I'm saying. If we're taking him at face value for some of the stuff that we're going to discuss later on, I think that we should be taking him at face value, at his word, for some of this early life stuff of which there's no record.
Right, and there's no record in the British military of him doing it, which has been brought up. But why would you keep records of someone you didn't let in?
Yeah, it's tough to say. And I think that some of the other thing that we're struggling against is record keeping at this time was an inexact science.
I think if you apply it in contrast to the rest of his life, it sounds legit.
Yep.
I mean, the dude served in every branch of service the fucking British had.
So after finishing school, or after finishing in Oxford at the Oxford High School for Boys, he wanted to go onward and upward, and around the same time, he had befriended a guy named Cyril Beeson, and he and Cyril cycled around Berkshire, in Buckinghamshire and Oxfordshire, and they visited almost every single parish church, monument, and site of antiquities, and made rubbings of the brasses, the monumental brasses, so like the ornaments that are on these things. And this kind of started Lawrence down a path where he became fascinated with and began to study antiquities and ancient history.
Well, it goes beyond that, though, doesn't it?
Yep.
Didn't they get freaking credited with actually making a still to this day used historical record of architecture in churches around that area?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I think that these weren't kid. Can you imagine the parish priests? These fucking kids come in with these rubbings. They won't leave. They don't come on Sunday though. They're annoying the hell out of me, and then it turns out that what they're doing actually saves my church from being forgotten about. I mean, that's I don't know, man. It seems that when they talk about it, I read that too, and I was like, that seems weird, man, because they were into it.
Yes.
That's what happens, in video games.
Yeah, you actually do something with your life. Yeah. It's incredible. And I think that, again, this speaks to single-minded focus with Lawrence and dedication to a craft. And, we see this evolving a little bit over time, with him and his other areas of interest. But, once he gets onto something, he's hard to shake. He throws himself entirely into it. So after he does all these rubbings and cycle around, collecting history, he enrolls at Jesus College at Oxford. It's the same period that he first heads to the Middle East. in the summer of 1909, he set out alone on a 3-month walking tour of Crusader castles in what was then Ottoman Syria. He traveled about 1,000 miles on foot.
Yeah, this is back when archaeology was really starting to become popular. I think everyone, it's kind of like the same way archaeology became popular after Indiana Jones. This guy was almost like a real Indiana Jones, except no Nazis.
Yeah. I mean, he fought Germans, though. That's pretty close. Or German aligned tribes. So I'm going to call it pretty close.
Oh, I mean, Hitler was in that army.
Yes, he was. Go ahead. Sorry.
No. I wasn't saying anything. You go right ahead. Talk about him doing all of this archaeology shit, because this is another thing that impressed me about him. I knew he was educated, but archaeologist that's a very particular skill.
Yes.
And smart
actually,
as fuck.
Smart as fuck is exactly correct. He graduated at the very top of his class from Jesus College, and he submitted a thesis. And I'm gonna read this verbatim, and then I'm gonna try to translate it into what it actually means. So his thesis
try to interpret it.
Yeah.
You said translate. I thought you were going to tell me I'm going to translate it into French. I'm like, oh,
no, I don't.
So we're going to be a 3-part show, guys. Part 1 is Andrew reading the thesis. Go ahead.
So all of it. I have it here in front of me.
Are you really going to read the whole thing?
No, not. Oh. No, I don't have that much time. I've got a 4-month-old baby. So his thesis was the influence of the Crusades on European military architecture to the end of the 12th century. And so this was based on his time in the Middle East studying Crusader castles and how those changed and developed in response to the military realities of the day. But also it drew on the research that he did cycling around France prior to that, and comparing and contrasting up until the end of the 12th century, how the architecture was transported from the Middle East to France and back, and how those interplayed. What you'll see in this time is the kind of the Crusader kings in the Middle East making a tremendous amount of technological advances in defensive technology in their castles, and that slowly but surely, as the Crusades ended and started and ended and started, and people were going back and forth, how that influenced the construction of quote unquote modern at the time castles in France.
Right. I didn't know that, man. Thank you for bringing that up. That makes me actually. I had like this really creepy thing, because the Crusades. Who was the non-Crusader force in the Crusades?
It was the
Ottoman Empire. Suleiman the Magnificent was the head of the Ottoman Empire. No, spoiler alert. Also, I'm going to talk about that in the next section as background. But the fact that he was studying the wars against the same friggin' guys he was going to eventually destroy.
Yep.
That's just impressive.
It's one of those things where he was doing something that had untold consequences in the positive sense, later on.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think.
Well, he was never guilty of not taking advantage of what he was good at.
So after he finishes this thesis that we just talked about, he became a practicing archaeologist in the Middle East and worked on behalf of the British Museum. He received £100 a year for his work, and in December of 1910 he sailed for Beirut, where he studied Arabic and then went to work at the excavations,
which he learned. Oh, and by the way, he spoke French from his 4 months of riding around as a kid in France. I keep saying these things, guys. I'm just trying to get you guys to realize how smart this guy was.
Yeah, it's like Jeff and I are smart dudes, but this guy makes us look like an idiot child.
Yeah, they force-fed me French for 4 months for me to learn it. And I wouldn't be able to speak a lick of it right now to a French person. This guy spoke it so well he got complimented on how good his French was as a teenager.
As a teenager cycling around in France, like they would ask him, he'd pull up to a church and he'd be, talking to the priest or the, whoever was there, and they'd ask, "What part of France are you from?" And he'd say, "I'm Welsh." But that's kind of where he's at. He
dedicating himself to architecture, or to discovery and history and stuff like that, right?
Exactly. And, that brings us up to the end of 1914.
When the bottom falls out of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Quite literally. Let's talk about the onset of World War I and then his involvement in it. Not his entire involvement. Me and Andrew will be back. But let me give you an overview of World War I, guys. And I do this because I guarantee you that you can speak to me, every single person, whether they're speaking with authority and knowledge or without. Everyone can talk about World War II till the cows come home. But this war is what caused World War II. And this war was so big and so impactful to the world at the time that they thought it was going to be the last war ever fought. They had to go to World War II because it was the sequel to this. I mean, more people died in this war than any other war. It was the modern day warfare for the first time. And so here's what happened. June 28th, 1914, the heir apparent to the throne of Austria-Hungary, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, it's not just a band, was assassinated. It's noted with triggering the war. I'm not going to agree with it. I'm going to say it might be the event that pushed everything over the edge, but you had a lot of different things going on politically all over the place. So a following set of diplomatic emergencies that followed right afterwards, all connecting back to this assassination, and military actions done by completely unrelated parties to the issue. So you had Russia, and some people in Russia didn't like this guy, and somebody killed this guy to try to prevent him from taking over the crown, and it caused a dispute. Germany somehow gets involved, and France gets involved. See, it really got weird quick there. The Ottoman Empire got involved. So they had Allied and Axis powers in World War II. In this war, we have what's called the Central Powers and the Allied powers. So your original Central Powers were Austria-Hungary, was one place at the time, Germany, and Italy. And the original Allied forces were France, Russia, and Great Britain. So eventually, about halfway through the war, the United States and Italy, yes, Italy, the same country that was on the bad guy side, joined the Allied forces. Italy kind of sees what's the way that the Central Forces are going with their world domination, because it became more than just a dispute thing. These guys were trying to destroy everything. So Italy says we want nothing to do with it. They move over to the Allied side. But then the Ottoman Empire and Bulgaria, of all places, joined the Central Powers, and that was the basis of it. Why Japan was in there when there was no other country over there that they were involved in, I don't know. But they were there. Who knows? That's not this episode. And why Bulgaria is in there? I think they just wanted people to know they existed. Now, the Ottoman Empire made this decision to join the war was very self-serving. Very self-serving. And this is it. So the Ottoman Empire made the war. The war was called the Great War, quote-unquote, the Great War, or the War to End All Wars. Armistice Day, which eventually turned into Veterans Day, all came about from this war. I mean, there's so many things you can... World War II happened because of this war. There is no doubt about it. The way that World War I was handled led to World War II happening. So you can almost say that it was a war that never ended, because all it did was take a breather and then come back. It's like a virus you didn't finish all your antibiotics on, and it comes back stronger. That's why I equate World War I and World War II. Because if you go back, the Allied forces and the Axis forces pretty much are the same as the Allied and the Central Powers. Add in a couple communists, some fascism, Mein Kampf, and, completely trying to annihilate an entire race of people, and you've got yourself the start to World War II. So who was the Ottoman Empire, right? You hear that word a lot. People, it was like 4 years ago, guys. I actually looked it up because I wanted to know. I knew the Turks were involved in it, but I thought it's a lot deeper than that. So the Ottoman Empire, or known in Western Europe as the Turkish Empire, was a monarchy that was based and originated from what is modern-day nation of Turkey. It was a colonial and an imperial empire. So that means it moved in and colonized different areas and then imperialized it and said, this is ours. So pretty much they were world domination, like Rome or the Nazis or Antifa. I don't know, like any of those guys. People that just want to take over more stuff. They want to, even the British Empire. They want to expand it. And they did it with a mixture of colonization and imperialism. All right. So that means that we make you think that we're doing you a favor, but then when we show up, we make you follow our rules. Sounds like a shitty deal. That's how they got around. It actually started in the 13th century. The end of the 13th century was when it was established. And the height of its power was under the guy we talked about before, Suleiman the Magnificent, in the 16th and 17th century. The empire at that time was a multinational, multilingual empire controlling most of Southeast Europe, parts of Central Europe, Western Asia, parts of Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, North Africa, the Horn of Africa, and a small little part of the Mediterranean Sea. I'm lying, that I just added. They pretty much controlled everything. And that was why the Crusades happened. They were trying to reduce their ability to spread, and they didn't work out. I mean, guys, spoiler alert, Crusades got lost by the Crusaders. They didn't win. There's still Arabs in Middle East, and that was their intent, to get rid of them. It didn't work out. So they joined the Central Powers during World War II, or World War I, because they had been losing their territories, and in the 6th century grip of power, which is the longest grip of power by any empire in the history of the world, was starting to fade and become irrelevant. So I'm pretty sure they joined basically just to have a reason to invade or attack and expand their territory and try to say, hey, world, we're still important. Kind of like what Bulgaria did, except Bulgaria did it and no one still knows who they are. The Ottoman Empire did to try to rekindle, and unfortunately, everyone was not paying attention to him, and all they did was get a focus on him, and they led themselves. Modern-day Turkey was established after the post-war independence revolt against the Allied occupiers in England and France happened. Modern-day Turkey was actually a revolt against the guys who won World War I, occupied Turkey. And so these guys then had a revolt. Pretty much the old Ottoman Empire revolted, but they established themselves not as a dictate or a monarchy anymore. They were not a dictatorship because they're not dictator. They're kind of like, I guess you can say they're a republic, but I don't think anyone there votes for the people that are in charge. Basically, Turkey's still there. It's just not a monarchy, and they don't run anything anymore. Istanbul is Constantinople. You listen to that song, you can go listen to it. It's about the Ottoman Empire. All right, let's get back around here and let's pick up with T. Lawrence. I just wanted to make sure everyone understood what World War I came from and who the Ottoman Empire is. Because all you guys are at home going, yeah, Ottoman Empire, but you don't know shit. I mean, because I didn't. So I had to look up some stuff. It's okay to say you don't know something. Don't pretend you know something when you don't. Right, Andrew?
Yes.
That sounds like I'm accusing him of something, but I'm not. All right, so...
I don't know shit, man.
No, I do know shit. I stay away from it. January 1914. Lawrence and some colleagues were co-opted into the British military to be used on a scientific archaeological front to gather intelligence as non-members of the military. So don't get it twisted. He wasn't drafted. It wasn't co-opted didn't mean they threw him in a uniform. He was filling a role as a civilian archaeologist for the military against his will. Co-opted means we're here and taking over because we have to. You need to do this. And they were using him as a front to an intelligence operation. This would be something that they did to Lawrence throughout his entire career. I think he got very good at it, and I think he sought it out. But he may have invented modern-day intelligence gathering, too, so subjective. But he did that, and he got a bad taste in his mouth, I think, about being co-opted. Because I'm thinking he would have willingly joined. But what that did for him in the long run was it pissed off his friend, colleague that he was working with, who told him, don't you dare enlist as an enlisted guy. When they come to you, because they were going to everybody of age, you tell them that you will only be an officer, and you hold out because you're too smart and you know too much about this area for them to waste your time being an enlisted guy. He followed his advice. It took a year, but eventually, because of his ability to speak Arabic and his personal experience and knowledge of the region, he got assigned to Cairo to work for the Arab Bureau as an officer. Awesome, I think, because they would have made him an enlisted guy. British military does not really they're like the Soviet military was. NCOs even don't have much. It's the officers and everyone else. Having said that, the officer corps, very, very, say it again, aristocratic.
Right?
They have deep. It's like what our military would be like if we only had West Point grads. They would have the market cornered and they wouldn't let anyone else be in there. That's the way the British military was. He was completely blackballed by all of his peers, and for no reason. For no reason other than he demanded to be an officer and won because they needed him. But that was Lawrence. He saw needs and he used those needs to get his way. It's great when you're 9 times out of 10, your way is right. So just like depicted in the movie that is based directly on his own memoirs called 7 Pillars of Wisdom, Lawrence spent his time on the staff job in the Arab Bureau making maps and creating daily intelligence bulletins. He hated this job. The people around him, because he just wouldn't play their games and pretend he was happy, he was miserable.
If you're insubordinate with me, Lawrence, I shall put you under arrest.
It's my manner, sir.
Your what?
My manner, sir. It looks insubordinate, but it isn't really.
Well, I can't make out whether you're bloody bad-mannered or just half-witted.
I have the same problem, sir.
Shut up.
Yes, sir.
Now, the Arab Bureau seem to think you would be of some use to them in Arabia. Why, I can't imagine. You don't seem able to perform your present duties properly.
I cannot fiddle, but I can make a great state from a little city.
What?
Themistocles, sir, a Greek philosopher.
I know you've been well educated, Lawrence. It says so in your dossier. You're the kind of creature I can't stand, Lawrence. But I suppose I could be wrong. All right, Dryden, you can have him for 6 weeks. Who knows? Might even make a man of him.
But I don't think that, and I have no evidence that he ever came to this realization, but I think he didn't see the benefit of the time he spent there. He got to be around a lot of the politicians who worked in the intelligence field that helped him along. He also got to know the leaders. General Allenby took over, which was after Lawrence already started in the revolt. Allenby already liked Lawrence because he knew him. But Lawrence also learned about everything to have to do with intelligence, right, in these bulletins. He knew every personality. He knew every single issue that was happening. He knew every single reason that this personality was important and this personality wasn't. And that helped him because he actually applied the way he talked to people differently than anyone else. See, you'll see it in all the movies, and you can see it with the way they handled like the Swahilis during that whole conflict. The British are real. Our way is right. Why can't you just do it our way?
And if you don't speak the kings, just speak louder.
Yeah. And if the way to win wars is to have discipline and to stand in uniforms and follow orders. He knew better. He knew you cannot go into a culture that is based on tribal differences, a tribal culture that is very, very deep-seated with tradition, just like the British military is, and expect them to just roll over when they're consistently known to be a culture of warriors. I mean, these same guys that were in the Arab Revolt were the guys that were part of the Ottoman Empire during the Crusades.
I think it's two cultures of rigidity meeting each other, and Lawrence was the only one who saw that flexibility on one side doesn't mean you're weak. It means that you're
and you can argue that he manipulated his Arab, because he never, guys, when he left after the war ended, him and one of his best friends in his entire life, Prince Faisal, they never talked again, which leads me to believe that all his talk and his staging may have been just that. He may have been working these guys like an operator the whole time to get them to do what they want. And the reason why is because of what I'm going to tell you about next. So, British had failed in their attempts to influence the Arabs to take up arms against the Ottoman Empire. They were not doing well in their attempts to have the Emir, Mecca, Sharif Hussein, which is pretty much the king of Arabs, come lead the revolt against the Ottoman Empire. Why? Well, Sharif Hussein wanted the British to support Syria being established and given to the Arabs as a future Arab nation. Unbeknownst to him, unbeknownst to most of the people in the world, the Sykes-Picot Agreement was happening at that time. Now, what that was a land grab agreement between France and Great Britain for control of the land that they would conquer. France was promised Syria. So everything Great Britain did had to be short of promising what was going to be French colonial territory to anyone else. The Emir of Mecca was on the fence. Am I going to support the Ottoman Empire or am I going to support the British? He had to choose one or the other. He had to choose what was in the best interest of his people, because he didn't have the armies. They were not an armed. They were just removed shortly from the Ottoman Empire. They were establishing their own. They didn't even have this. Saudi Arabia wasn't even established yet. He just was the overseer of Mecca. Still royal, but not royal with any kind of backing. He was in charge of a bunch of Bedouin tribes that wouldn't know who he was if they saw him. It was more like the Queen of England is now. All pomp and circumstance, no real authority. But he was also a religious and a spiritual leader to the Arab people, and he could get that revolt going. And so they needed him. So he eventually came to a conclusion. He said, look, the Ottoman Empire is done. What they're doing is wrong. They're killing Arabs. In the Muslim religion, that's not good, to kill unarmed Arabs. So he decides he's going to back the British. But he's not going to go and lead the Arab revolt. He's going to send his 3 sons to do it. So by proxy, they'll go there. But he won't. He'll be able to have plausible deniability that he participated in the Arab revolt. 2 of the sons, I'm not even going to say their names because they're forgettable. The third one, Prince Faisal, will turn into the greatest warrior that you've ever seen, because eventually he will stand in front of Darth Vader and take the sword for him. So, and in the movie, guys, Prince Faisal's played by Alec Guinness.
That's Obi-Wan Kenobi for those.
If you don't know that Alec Guinness is Obi-Wan Kenobi, you don't deserve to be told that. You should go back and watch Star Wars. Anyway, he's played by Prince Faisal, and in the movie, guys, we're talking because we're comparing them. They don't do service to the relationship that Faisal had with Lawrence. How did Lawrence get a relationship with him? Well, here's what happened. Lawrence is a pain in the ass to everybody at the Arab borough, including the guys who are making plans that he knows about to try to get an Arab uprising. Well, he positions himself to be able to be the temporary. Now, this they don't do in the movie. In the movie, they do it a little bit different, but he actually was just a temporary fill-in while they waited for a experienced major who was an intelligence officer and had done, these kind of operations before. They were waiting for him to arrive. They had about 3 months. So they send Lawrence pretty much just to get him away from the Arab Bureau and get a couple breaks from this fucking whiny guy who's smarter than everybody, who knows everything, who's right, but we don't admit he's right. So they just get rid of him. And in the movie, they make it look like that too. But in the movie, they do it under the auspice of him knowing he's going to do this role. In reality, he was just going to backfill as the liaison, pretty much going to be the British bitch boy to Faisal, make him happy. Lawrence went there and immediately fucking befriended Faisal. Played to his friggin' royal, and he knew how to work royalty. I mean, he grew up in that environment. He knew if you can work a British royal, you can work any royal because they're the most uptight ones. And I think that his ability to make friends with Faisal and to speak about the Arabs and the Arab culture and the history of the area, and he believed it. He was well known to be pro let the Syria be established as an Arab nation. Now the question is, did he know about in the movie they go into it where they don't tell him and he's kind of just left out there to be the one holding the bag, and it backfires on him. But I think at some point he found out. He was too smart and could see the writing on the walls. Because he was not against openly telling his people he worked for, the British government, that they were wrong. And if you look in the paperwork, about halfway through the Arab Revolt, he started really backlashing against the British. And I think that's when he realized this agreement had been made. So he's allowed to go make promises to this soon-to-be Arab army because they know they can just write it off as him being Lawrence because he just does what he wants. So the British had their own intention. It backfired on them. June of 1916. The Ottoman Empire has now the means and momentum to advance along the entire Red Sea coastline, which means they got the Suez Canal, which was the whole purpose of the fighting there, and seized Mecca, which is why the Emir was now willing to play ball. And the British finally made a move that was going to make big returns. His rapport with the Arabs and the ability to interact positively and effectively with Arabs. The command sent Lawrence to fill in for another seasoned officer who was delayed in arriving. We talked about that. In turn, the Allied forces and persons who were committed to leading the Arab uprising, despite the lack of commitments from the British, was Faisal. He was the prince of one of 3 sons to the Emir of Mecca. He was sent to deal with the approaching threat. He had nobody he was in command of when he showed up, and Lawrence built him an army. Lawrence was only a temporary liaison for a different officer, but he made such an impression on Prince Faisal that Prince Faisal said, "I will go back to Mecca if you do not make Lawrence the permanent guy here." Now, I think the British conceded to that because, like they say in the movie, it's a sideshow to a sideshow. The Arab Revolt was just something to make the Arabs seem to do something. You know, they were having to deal with Arab issues and Bedouin tribes while they're fighting the Ottomans. I think they wanted to just try to get them out of the way. They had no intention of letting them be in charge. So I think what they were doing was just trying to give them something to do. So they were willing to let him go because they were just like, look, these guys aren't going to amount to anything. But Lawrence quickly befriended Faisal, and this friendship and rapport had been built. The friendship and rapport he'd been building among Arabs was quietly making him a necessary go-between because he was the only one they would talk to. And also, he openly contradicted his own orders and spoke openly of the short-sighted and imperialistic views and how it would get them nowhere with the tribal Bedouin people. They were not going to win over anyone unless they were willing to treat the Arab culture with some of the same respect they insist they receive as Englishmen. Lawrence showed a learned, deep understanding of the Arabs, and he spent his time learning their culture instead of trying to change it, as was the standard rule among not just the British, but all organized military armies. Everyone has that. Everyone. The British are not alone in trying to change cultures to fit their perception of what every military does this. The only militaries in the world that have ever learned from this are the British during World War I and the Americans by establishing Green Berets. That's it. But even then, we'd had to fight hand and tooth. So that's why I understand a lot of what he went through. We have to fight with local officers, regular army officers all the time in country because they would do things that were just contradictory to building rapport.
Can I ask a question there? This is just pure curiosity. Is that because, do you think, based on your experience, of standard doctrine, right? So this is the army way. This is the way we do it. I don't care if it's inconvenient for the indigenous troops. Or is that because of or I guess really is the question, because of a lack of respect for your the local troops who you're trying to interact with and build rapport? Is that the cause of it, or is it just ignorance?
Yes.
Okay.
Both of them. You can see individually. So you got some guys that go over there and they just don't. They use the words. The savages. I'm sorry, guys. Taking the lives of people for political gain is savage. Whether you're wearing a uniform or you're not. Whether you're doing it with guns and technology or you're doing it with friggin' spears and arrows. It's savage nonetheless. We're all savages. Don't know shit about their culture, and you're in their land, and you refuse to allow your judgment to be used. You tie and hold on to these doctrinal, and we know what we're doing, and we've been able to be the world's police and the light of the world's freedom because people do it our way. Yet every single time we don't use these tactics where we build rapport where we don't try to change them, where we just do what we say we're going to do, we've lost or we've gotten our asses handed to us every time, except for in the Civil War because we're killing ourselves. But yes, so to answer your question, yes.
Thank you.
In the British Empire, it's more pronounced because their British officers' manner is so distinct, and they believe that they're a gift to the world, and that their way is right. That's what makes him so amazing. Is he was a guy that thought outside the box like an American, but he was in a friggin' he was from those he grew up in that society. He wanted to be in the military in that society, and he just was like, no, can't do it. He didn't hate the military. I mean, this guy was a friggin' warrior, as you'll see, but he just didn't buy into the bullshit. You know, lining up and standing in lines and shooting yourself in the foot and letting people shoot you. How long did we do that as a world?
Hundreds of years.
Hundreds of years. What changed that?
Technology.
Revolutionary War.
Technology.
Not technology. Loss of British forces to small little skirmish groups that didn't abide by their rules of combat is what won the Revolutionary War, and it slowly changed combat.
But just to the point I was trying to make with that is the reason why the troops didn't have to follow their rules of combat was because they had, rifled muskets versus smoothbores, and you didn't need mass volley fire to have the same casualty taking impact.
Maximizing effective fire, overwhelming fire superiority is always the number one task. So I know what you're saying, but
yeah,
it's a roundabout way of saying it. Still putting more accurate fire on target is always going to win. So anyway, back to World War I and building of rapport and the departure from standardized ways of thinking. So Lawrence and Faisal, the two of them, come up with a strategy and a plan for the revolt to be successful, effective, and worth the time spent. It was very important to them that all three of those things, they did a very good job using what we now call the military decision-making process. They sat down, they weighed what do we have to do to get these guys to want to do it? What do we have to do to make sure that when it's done, that we didn't just waste everyone's time? And we have to be in charge of our own destiny. They knew that. Faisal was not stupid. He was a world politician. This guy was a very good diplomat. He was also very smart to not take lead controlling the military movements. He let Lawrence do it. He brought in Bedouin warlords and put them in charge of Lawrence's plan, him and Lawrence's plan. So they came up with this plan that they enacted on their own against British decisions and British desires and went postal on the Ottoman Empire. You got to understand, guys, you've got these Bedouin tribes, and this is very important. These Bedouin tribes, if you watch the movie, Sheriff Ali, who becomes one of his best friends, and the guy that was with him pretty much, he to me, he was a real man, but I think that what Faisal was to him, the character of Sheriff Ali in the movie fills in. I think Faisal was a lot more important to the personal relationship they had was more important than what the movie made out to be. But Sheriff Ali shoots his guide in the movie because he is from this one tribe. For no other reason than he is from this one tribe. So he shoots him. Kills him dead. Later on, Lawrence somehow gets these two tribes that have been killing each other dead just on sight for centuries to put away their frigging feud and fight for the same cause. And I'm here to tell you guys that is almost impossible to accomplish. And he didn't do it because Faisal said to do it. He did it by appealing to them and learning them and what their motivations were and what was important to them and using their culture against them.
You are mad. To come to Aqaba by land, we should have to cross the Nefud Desert.
That's right.
The Nefud cannot be crossed.
I'll cross it if you will.
You? It takes more than a compass, Englishman. The Nefud is the worst place God created.
I can't answer for the place, only for myself. 50 men.
50? Against Aqaba?
If 50 men came out of the Nefud, there would be 50 men other men might join. The Hawitat are there, I hear.
The Hawitat are brigands. They will sell themselves to anyone.
Good fighters, though.
Good? Yes. There are guns at Aqaba.
They face the sea, Sheriff Ali, and cannot be turned round. From the landward side, there are no guns at Aqaba.
With good reason. It cannot be approached from the landward side.
Certainly the Turks don't dream of it. Akabar's over there. It's only a matter of going.
Ah, mad.
It was brilliant piece of manipulation.
So this is an area in which I don't have a ton of institutional knowledge, just because it's outside of kind of my bailiwick. But I do think, certainly from the portrayal of the movie and the reading I've done, I think it speaks to Lawrence's kind of soft-spoken charisma. He was and intelligence. He was able to, frankly, like you said, manipulate two tribes that had a blood feud. I mean, let's be honest. They were killing each other for generations because of, well, at this point, really, who knows? But just because, or because, somebody drank from a well at some point.
That's right.
Lawrence's ability to bridge that gap by hook or by crook through subtle intimidation, bribery, or force of personality, I think really speaks to why he was able to be so successful down the road throughout the Arab Revolt. I think it's interesting. I think that, trying to think of the right way to say this.
Oh, I can't wait for this.
Yeah. When an immovable force meets an unstoppable object, sometimes the only way to get them to go in the same direction is via lubrication. And that's exactly what Lawrence was here. He was greasing the wheels between the British and all these Arab tribes to bring some cooperation and I guess you could say some hate and discontent down on a sideshow that I think ended up tying down far more troops and resources than I think anybody was really.
So I think a very telling scene in the movie is the first time he meets the real badass tribal leader, the one with the one played by Anthony, whatever his name is.
Anthony, yeah.
So he meets him.
I was gonna say Hopkins, but that's not that.
Yeah, it's not him. This guy he is really like followed. He's a warrior, and a cutthroat, and a unapologetic and a very alpha male leader. And there is a scene in the movie where he dresses this guy down while unassumingly making it look like he's just being submissive to him, and and the guy actually sits down and says, "You have the tongue of a serpent." And to me, that says everything about him. He knew by his manner and how he acted that he was in control of where this conversation was going. By not being confrontational, not being unilateral, but being submissive, and by saying certain little things, he would completely change the thought process of that person and get them to be backed into a corner to commit themselves to doing something. And he did this over and over again. And Faisal would say that he would use Lawrence to quell disputes between guys who were unquellable because he was so good at it. But I think that it was missed because he didn't do that with the British military. He would just tell them they're fucking stupid. Because his opinion was they were too smart to be doing this shit, and they need to hear it. And that's one of the things about him that I love, is he did not utilize those techniques on his own people, although he could have. Because fuck them. These guys, I'll use it against them because I'm in their land. And he was very, very pro-Arab owning their own territory. And he was an anti-imperialist, which is very weird to be British and be against that. But so with all that, they start the Arab Revolt. There were a lot of attacks and missions that were successful during the initial revolt. And this had so much of the partnership of Lawrence and Faisal imprinted on it that they decided not to take Medina, a holy city, for a particular reason. And that was what made their plan work, was they completely avoided the one city that they were told they needed to take. So the British said, take Medina. It is the number 2. So if you got Mecca, guys, everyone knows about Mecca. But what you don't know is Mecca light is Medina. They refused to even focus on Medina. Because here's why. You've got all these guys that you're dragging them along, you're keeping them interested. They're not completely always there. They come in and they go out, but there's always enough people to fight. The second you give them a holy thing to win, you supersede Faisal's friggin' authority over them because they've got a holy victory. So him and Faisal said, we're not going to give those guys a reason to say, we're good. We took Medina. Holy victory for Allah. They avoided it completely. That way it drugged them along where they were always asking, when are we going to take Medina? When are we going to take Medina? It was so important to them that Faisal and Lawrence denied them of it because they knew that was going to be the end of the Arab revolt. And it was brilliant. So their first big battle worthy noting is the victory at Aqaba and the attack from land after a 300-mile movement into the city across a barren desert with only the water they had on them. This is a big scene in the movie, and it's one of my favorite scenes. Aqaba could have been assaulted from the sea, but the command in Cairo denied the plan, and basically they denied the plan because what you got to realize is even the British command back in Great Britain, they have trench warfare kicking off in France. They just had Gallipoli happen. They didn't give any focus or support to the British command in Cairo. Really, they were just as fucked as Lawrence was. It was kind of like shit rolling downhill. They had no support. So there was stuff that they probably would have allowed to happen and done themselves, but they just didn't have the means to do it. So they couldn't get permission to assault Aqaba by sea. So the only way to get it by land was going over this 300-mile stretch of open desert.
And Jeff, sorry, correct me if I'm wrong, or misremembering. The other reason that the British weren't willing to attack Aqaba by sea was that there were relatively heavy artillery pieces commanding the only approachable beaches. Right?
Yes,
so
it's misrepresented. They were aged guns, and I don't think they would have done. They had gone into higher casualty producing situations. Gallipoli. You know what I mean? So it's like Gallipoli. They knew there were certain situations they went into where they knew there was going to be a high death toll. This one was just not one they were willing to have that toll for.
Fair enough.
So that's why they were like no, and that's why they knew they had to make a statement and declare the Arab revolt there. Because they'd been doing good work with all the small little things they were doing. But he got them to do this, and it was a brilliant piece of maneuvering because it really put the Ottoman Empire on the defensive. Mm-hmm. And actually is the reason why Germans ended up in the area, because Germany had to push guys there. So they affected even the European theater by having German soldiers have to get pushed to support the Ottomans.
Yep.
So in the film, the entire set of events is portrayed, but how accurate the actual events is a mystery. And I'm talking about the interactions. The Ab Borough's commander, General Sir Edmund Allenby, reacted not with anger or corrective action against Lawrence for doing his own thing, but actually promoted him, gave him some of the stuff they've been asking for a lot, like new guns and everything, but no artillery. That's a joke if you've seen the movie. Allenby was a big supporter of Lawrence's, and I think that they make him out to be a little bit of a conniver in the movie, but I think that according to the historical documents, they had a very good relationship with each other, and they liked each other. That is the halfway point of the movie at the end of the assault on Aqaba, and that is going to be where we end part 1 today. So, Andrew, say goodbye. We'll see you next week.
Goodbye. See you next week.